All right. Tonight we're going to be in Ecclesiastes 9. Ecclesiastes 9, and we're going to be looking at verses 11 through 18 of Ecclesiastes 9. It says, "Again I saw that under the sun the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge, but time and chance happen to them all. For a man does not know his time, like fish that are taken in an evil net, and like birds that are caught in a snare, so the children of man are snared at an evil time when it suddenly falls upon them. I have also seen this example of wisdom under the sun, and it seemed great to me. There was a little city with a few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no one remembered that poor man. But I say that wisdom is better than might, though the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. The words of the wise, heard in quiet, are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good." I want you to see first in verses 11 and 12 that you can't control it all. You can't control it all. Because you can't control other people, and you can't control nature, and you can't control so many other things. How many great athletes have there been that have trained and trained and trained to go to the Olympics just to have something happen where they're not able to compete in the Olympics, where they get an injury right at the end? I remember, football players that had to miss the Super Bowl because they got hurt in practice the week of the Super Bowl. And so all those things, you can plan and you can plan and you can plan of what you want to do, but sometimes things happen. He says the race isn't always won by the person that's the swiftest. Usually whoever's fastest is going to win a race, right? You remember Usain Bolt, the runner from Jamaica, fastest man in the world, right? He usually wins the races that he's in. But if something happened, like let's say he slipped a little bit or one of the cleats that he had on broke while he was running, it could cause him to lose. It doesn't always happen that way. Usually you would think in a battle that whoever was the strongest would win. That's not always the case. I think we're probably happy that's not always the case, because the United States of America wouldn't exist if that was always the case, because we were just a bunch of ragtag people taking on one of the greatest militaries in the world when we took on the British Empire. When Mike Tyson lost to Buster Douglas, do you think that Buster Douglas was a better fighter and a better battler than Mike Tyson? He was, just for that one night. I think if they had had 100 fights, Mike Tyson would have won 99 others. But that was the one that he won, because the battle doesn't always go to the strong. Bread doesn't always go to the wise. And there are people that are really smart that don't have any money. So the riches don't always go to the intelligent. What is that? Because we don't always know. He gives an example that is near and dear to me. He talks about fish getting caught in a net. Do you think the fish was thinking, oh, something bad's about to happen to me? No. He sees the little worm dangling, and he comes up there to bite it, and then the next thing he knows, you're getting rolled like this across the rest of the pond and out of the water. And we're that same way sometimes. We think that everything's going good and we don't see all the pitfalls that might happen. And there are things that are out of our control. It suddenly happens to us. You ever had a time in your life when it seemed like everything was going right? It was going right, it was going right, it was going right, and then boom, all of a sudden something happened and it's like everything fell apart at once. You can't be in control of everything all the time, so you have to let it go to God's hands. And you have to understand that even if you train the hardest, if you work the hardest, if you are the wisest because you studied the most and you do all that stuff, that sometimes you still don't win. Verses 13 through 16 should see that wisdom's better than money, even though people remember the money. What happens here? It says there's a little city that has just a few people in it. And when a great king comes and lays siege against the city, laying siege meant that he shut off everything coming in and coming out of that place. And by shutting everything that was coming in and out, he was trying to starve them out. And as he tried to starve them out, he set up these siege works to make sure nobody could get anything in or out. So they're under siege. And what happens? A poor man who also happens to be wise takes care of it. He takes care of it, and then everybody is delivered through his wisdom. But what does he say at the end? Yet no one remembered that poor man. Nobody remembered the poor man. Wisdom's better than money, but people don't remember the wisest. You probably sit there and try to think, who's the wisest person I've ever heard of? And it might take you a while to comb through everybody and think, but I say, who's the richest person you've ever heard of? Y'all all think about Bill Gates pretty quick, don't you? Doesn't take much. Doesn't take much thought to come up with that. Because that's what happens. Wisdom is better than all the money in the world. But people remember the money. And it's a sad thing that wisdom is better than strength, but the poor man's wisdom is despised and his words are not heard. Finally, in verses 17 and 18, quiet wisdom is important. Some people think they're the more right, the louder they are. I think they're the more right, the louder than they are. I have 5 kids, and when they argue, it's usually the 3 little ones. The 3 little ones, when they argue, it's not so much about who's right, but I think they're having a contest to see who can fuss the loudest at the other one. Because they figure, if I can outshout them, then that's going to be right. And what does Solomon say here? That's not what you want to do. He says it's better to have a quiet wisdom, to be able to sit and to hear someone speak their words and their wisdom in quiet. It's better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Because that's what's the ruler do? The ruler tries to shout to show his power. But what does the wise man do? He sits and he calmly explains it. I was talking with somebody at the office the other day because a name came up that I hadn't thought about in a while when I was doing some research. And I said, I really like that guy. And I said, one of the things that I liked about him, I won't mention his name since this goes on the internet at the end. But so one of the things I always liked about him is even though I'm pretty close to the far end of the right end of the political spectrum, and he is as close as you can get to the far end of the left side of it, at least what the far end of the left side used to be. I think that goes even further out than it used to, but you could have a conversation with him. And you could talk, and you could have an intellectual conversation where you actually were quietly discussing the issues of the day and having it go back and forth. That doesn't happen anymore. Now it seems to go directly to name-calling and shouting and everything like that. But I think we would all have a lot more wisdom if we actually sat and we talked and we didn't let everything get so riled up about it. I think that probably social media has probably made that worse than most things. I've seen so many posts of my friends that is like, if you don't support this candidate, just unfriend me. Or if you don't support this other candidate, unfriend me. If I did, I wouldn't hardly have any friends left on Facebook. Because I'd lose half of them right away. And I don't know why we're like that. I can be friends with a Democrat. I'm actually friends with lots of Democrats. I'm sure some of y'all in here are Democrats, and we're friends and we get along just fine. But it seems like that's where we've got to as a country, that it's just all the time, getting up in somebody's face and having to yell and to scream, when the best thing we can do is that we can have that quiet discussion, and then we'll find out that we're maybe not as far apart as we thought we were, number one. And number two, we might find out that some people have some wisdom that we don't understand, and so that we can hear it from them. And one of the things that I used to like to do growing up was talk with my, we always called him Gramps. He was my older sister's grandpa, and just smart guy, a nice guy. And they lived in Belmont, but then the last few months of his life, he lived up with us in our house. And I'd sit there and talk with him. And he just had so much wisdom. There you go. But he was so quiet in his speaking. Now, there's some things he did that weren't especially wise. Like he had oxygen, and he'd light up a cigarette while he had the oxygen in his nose, which that's really not the best thing to do. But he says, I've been smoking this long, and I've got emphysema now. I'm not going to quit. Right? But about the things of the world, it was like he could see things that a lot of people wouldn't see, and he could just do it, but he would explain it in such a quiet way. He was never bold and brash about it. He would just explain it, and I think it was a great testament to who he was. And wisdom is also, here he says, better than the weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. Rather be wise than have that military might. He says, but one sinner destroys much good. And when I was thinking about that, it made me think about Achan. You remember Achan in the story of Joshua in Jericho? So in that narrative in Joshua, in the book of Joshua, they go into Jericho. And before they go in, Joshua says, the Lord says that you basically are going to wipe everything out, but you're going to save the gold and the silver and the good stuff. You're going to save that, and that's going to be dedicated to the Lord, right? You don't take it. You don't take it. And they beat Jericho, right? You remember they walked around and the wall fell when they blew the trumpet and shouted, and they all rushed in and they routed Jericho. Then they go up after beating Jericho, which was like one of the big things to win, because they had such great fortifications. They go to little old Ai, and they're going to go beat them. And Israel gets whooped. I mean, they get whooped in this. And they go back with their tail between their legs, and they get back, and they're just like, what happened? And God says, y'all have sinned. And they said, what did we do? And they said, and basically they found out Achan had stolen stuff from Jericho for himself and had hidden it. And so God said, now you fix that problem, and then you'll have victory. And that's exactly what they did. Now, they stoned him, and they stoned his family, and they stoned his livestock, and they burned him down. They wanted to make sure, I guess, that everything was good, and they did that, and then they went and they fought Ai, and they won. And they won the battle handily at that point. But one man messed up for a whole nation. I think that was incredible. And so I think of that often when I say, I don't want to be the Achan. Right? I don't want to be the Achan of my community. I don't want to be the Achan of my country or my church or my family. I don't want to be the one that brings that down on everyone. But, it just takes one. It just takes one that can ruin a good thing. You ever heard anybody say that? It only takes one person to ruin a good thing. And that's exactly what Solomon's getting at here. It was Jerusalem wisdom before it was Southern wisdom. And it's wise indeed. Any comments or questions on that?